Good morning, friends. Welcome to the e-learning class of biology. We'll continue with the chapter that we started with control coordination. First part, we are dealing with nervous control and coordination. Up till now, we discuss nervous system of two animal in this chapter: nervous system of Hydra, nervous system of Planaria, and now even in addition to that, we discuss neural tissue or nervous tissue, the one which is made up of two important types of cell, nervous cell, nerve cell, and neuroglial cell. Nerve cell we discuss in detail with those cyton and dendron, with the dendron, which is the one of the dendron called axon, which is either myelinated or non-myelinated. Now, next part of a chapter we want to discuss now. This part will include the structure of a synapse and the how transmission of impulse takes place through the synapse. We introduce the topic. What is a synapse? Synapse is the junction between the two neuron. So if this is one neuron, this is another neuron, junction between these two neurons, and this is called as a synapse. Remember. We'll have two types of synapse in the body. First type is called as electrical synapse, and second one is called a chemical synapse. One by one, we'll discuss structure and how the transmission of impulse takes place. First one we'll discuss. This is called a electrical synapse. Here I'm showing the diagrammatic representation of electrical synapse. Any synapse, when we say, we'll have a three structure in it. First neuron contributing this presynaptic cell, or the cell or neuron which is before the synapse. Then we'll have actual junction which will include either gap or no gap. And then the another neuron that is called a postsynaptic cell or postsynaptic neuron. Transmission of impulse will take place from one synapse to the another synapse in this way. Now, what could be the character of electrical synapse here? Gap between this neighboring neuron is very narrow here. See this gap I'm talking about. I'm going to show the comparison of these two, chemical and the electrical synapse. But here, gap between these two neurons is very minimum, is very small. And there is a formation of electrical conductive link between. See, these are the links. These are the gap junction, and these links are between pre and post synaptic neuron. Presynaptic neuron, I told you, synapse, neuron before the synapse, and postsynaptic is a neuron which is next to the synapse. So here we have electrical conducting link between these two, and that will help for transmission of a nerve impulse. As I already told you, gap here is minimum, and we'll have such a kind of junctions here. What could be the character of this synapse? The one which are with closed neuron, and I told you the gap is almost 3.8 nanometer only. That way, these kind of a synapse are said to be mechanical. They work like a machine, remember. Here, no neurotransmitter is involved. Important character of this one, transmission across this type of gap, this type of the electrical synapse is faster, but remember that will also depend on the conduction at junction between two neurons. But generally, the transmission of a nerve impulse in case of the type of a neuron called electrical synapse is faster, remember. Even it is bidirectional in both directions. Transmission across takes place in both direction, or it may be unidirectional, remember. So here in this diagram, transmission may take place from pre to the post or post to the pre. This is for bidirectional. Chemical, we are going to conclude it will be one direction only, remember. Okay. Here, the one which is found in different body parts where we require fastest responses in the body. Best example is the defense response reflexes, remember. So whenever we require defense reflexes, that time such a kind of reflexes will work. Such type of synapse will work. Where it is present in human brain, we'll have an area called neocortex, remember. The area where we'll have a cerebral cortex, the one which is made up of, the one which is responsible for sensory perception, taking the stimulus, analyzing the stimulus, giving the proper response. And such area is called a neocortex. Even it is present in a hippocampus, another brain area, brain structure, the one which is present in temporal lobe, remember, the one which is present in temporal lobe of each cerebral cortex, and the one which is a part of a limbic system. We are going to discuss in next part the system which is for emotions. Remember, the one which takes action or regulate the emotions in the body. This is called as limbic system, and the part involved here is called a hippocampus. In neocortex, hippocampus, even in the retina of eye, even the spinal cord, even the olfactory bulb, we discuss, and the one which is mesencephalic nucleus of trigeminal nerve. Which nerve we are talking? This is cranial nerve, fifth in the series, and the one which supply to the teeth region or facial region, the one which is responsible for biting. Remember, and remember here, in all these cases, we have type of the synapse that is called as the electrical synapse. Let's check this something about the type of synapse which is minimum in our body as compared to the another one which is called a electrical synapse. Here I'm giving the diagram, comparison diagram. This is just now we discussed is the electrical synapse. Here we have those junctions, remember, and that will help for transmission of a nerve impulse in both the direction that we are showing here, either pre to the post or post to the pre-synaptic neuron. And remember, as compared to this, we'll have another type of a neuron synapse. This is called a chemical synapse. Gap here will be larger. We don't have direct junctions here. The vesicle will open and that will release a type of chemical here that is called a neurotransmitter. Second, we'll discuss, and this is called as chemical synapse, which are present in our body, majority in our body. Here is the presynaptic neuron with the bulb. Postsynaptic neuron here. Gap will be little larger, and the one which will be filled with neurotransmitter. This type of synapse where chemicals are involved, called as chemical synapse. Remember, we'll have two possibility here. Either the synapse junction is between one neuron and another neuron, or it will be between one end of a neuron and either muscle or gland. We'll discuss. And these are the specialized junction through which the cell of a neural system will send chemical signal now. So the message is in form of chemical signal to the other neuron or non-neuronal cell like glands or muscle. And this type of a junction is called as chemical synapse. Remember, I'll repeat, the specialized junction where message will be given in form of chemical signal either from one neuron to another neuron or from one neuron to the neuronal cell, either glands or the muscles. As compared to the 3.8 nanometer synapse, which is present in case of the other one, here the gap will be little larger, that is 20 to 40 nanometer. And I told you either junction is between one neuron and another neuron. This is chemical synapse. Here we'll have a neuromuscular junction, remember. I told you the one which is a synapse between motor neuron and muscle cell. Which neuron? Motor neuron we are talking about. So the message will be collected by sensory neuron that will be given to the spinal cord of brain. Analysis will take place in spinal cord of brain. Another neuron will carry the message to the muscles present in the hand or leg or any other part. And this neuron is called a motor neuron. Junction between this motor neuron and the muscle cell, this will be called as neuromuscular junction. So in both cases, we'll have type of a synapse. This is called as chemical synapse. Now, here is the structure, here the components of a chemical synapse, same diagram I'm showing again. This is the first neuron contributing the bulb. We generally call a synaptic bulb here. Second neuron contributing the surface here, this is a postsynaptic neuron. And here we have a gap, remember, this gap we are going to discuss. So the three component presynaptic neuron will contribute terminal, that is called axonic terminal here. This terminal I'm talking about, sort of a bulb-like structure. The synaptic membrane of the postsynaptic cell, this is the postsynaptic cell, this is dendron, or sorry, dendrite of next neuron or gland or muscle, and the postsynaptic neuron. This is something about the three component, remember. I'll repeat: presynaptic neuron, postsynaptic neuron, and the junction, the gap in between these two, remember. Okay, now next, how the impulse travel, along the synapse that we are going to discuss is this impulse travel along the axon of presynaptic neuron to the axonal bulb here. So all the way the impulse will come to up to here. What will be the changes that takes place? Most contain those synaptic bulb I told you, and the membrane contain those membranous sacs. These are called as synaptic vesicle, remember. So here are these synaptic vesicle, actually the one which will produce and keep ready those neurotransmitter required to fill up the junction. The membrane sacs are called as synaptic vesicle that will contain neurotransmitter molecule I told you. And when the impulse will reach to up to the synaptic bulb, what will happen here? Voltage sensitive calcium channels will open, and calcium will diffuse inward from extracellular fluid. So whatever the fluid present here outside, this is called ECF, extracellular fluid, the one which will contain calcium, and the calcium will diffuse all the way from outside to inside once the impulse will reach to up to the synaptic bulb. What will happen here next? And this will increase the calcium concentration inside the cell. This will initiate the changes, series of changes that will take place inside the bulb, and the one which will fuse the synaptic vesicle with the cell membrane. That way, presynaptic neuron, and where release of a neurotransmitter will take place by exocytosis. Same I am showing here in this diagram. As the chemical enter here, that will react with this vesicle, and this vesicle will fuse with the membrane here, and that will release the content. Content, we know it is neurotransmitter in this particular gap. Remember, until and up till this gap is filled, impulse will not travel from one neuron to the another neuron. So ideally to say this gap is empty, no impulse will travel. Once this gap is filled, impulse will travel from one neuron to the another neuron. Same I am telling you, the fusion will take place and release of neurotransmitter will take place by exocytosis. Once the neurotransmitter bind with the receptors of postsynaptic cell, the action is either excitatory or inhibitory process in form of on or off, the one which will depend upon neurotransmitter involved. So which neurotransmitter is involved, that will bind with this next membrane, and action will be either switch on or switch off, remember. Okay. Next one, once the impulse has been transferred across the synapse, so what will happen here? Impulse will carry from this neuron to another neuron because of the gap which is filled with the neurotransmitter. I told you empty gap will not do the work. Gap filled with the neurotransmitter will transmit the impulse. And what will happen here? This is momentary. This is for fraction of a second, remember. The enzyme will act now. This enzyme is called cholinesterase, the one which will destroy that neurotransmitter. So remember, for one impulse, one neurotransmitter will be released. And we already discussed in the properties that this is very fast, remember. Once the impulse will pass, the cholinesterase enzyme will be released, and that will destroy the neurotransmitter so that synapse is ready for another impulse, remember. Best example, when someone is shouting, those impulse will be received by stimulus will be received by ear. The thing will go to the brain, remember, through those synapses which are present in between. If it is one by one, continuous one, then we hear something, some sound. And if at all the weak stimulus is there, that might not fill up the gap, and that might not transmit the impulse. Remember, that's it. Is something about how the impulse travel from one neuron to the another neuron. Transmission of a nerve impulse we want to discuss inside one neuron and across the synapse. Remember, across the synapse we discuss. Now we want to discuss how the transmission of impulse takes place in one neuron. Neuron have specialized feature that we already discussed. This is called excitation, or the one which can get excited, remember. Okay, What is impulse? We already said impulse is the wave of biochemical or electrochemical disturbances passing along the neuron, remember. So along the side of one neuron. Say for example, impulse will be collected here that will all the way pass from here to up to the dendrite, remember. And this is the wave that is biochemical, electrochemical disturbances that will pass along the neuron. This is called nerve impulse, remember. Okay. And transmission of this nerve impulse is due to the electrical charges across the neuronal membrane, remember. How these electrical charges are there, that we'll discuss. And because of these electrical charges, positive and negative charges, the transmission of nerve impulse will take place. Each neuron is a charged cellular membrane, remember. Everyone will have a charged cellular membrane. The one which is with the voltage, which is a different on the outer as well as inner side, remember. So we'll have a different charge on outer side, different charge on inner side. This is because of some charge ions, remember. Plasma membrane that will separate outer and inner solution of a different chemical compound, but having approximately the same total number of ions, remember. So if 100 positive ions are present outside, 100 negative ions will be present inside, remember. That way the charge will be balanced, remember. Okay. Now, how the charges are developed, for that I am giving here in detail. The external tissue fluid has both sodium and potassium, but predominantly sodium, remember. So outer side will have more sodium, and definitely that will produce positive charge outside, remember. While the potassium and chlorine is present inside, or the fluid present inside, definitely more amount of chlorine, and that will develop negative charge inside, remember. So this condition, when positive charge outside, negative charge inside, nothing change is happening here, and this situation is called as polarized state, or we call it as resting stage, remember. I'll repeat, the condition of neuron when there is no conduction of any impulse. Say for example this hand, now nothing is there, no hot plate, nothing, no pin pricks here, so the neuron will be in a resting stage. What is the resting stage here? All the neuron will have positive ion outside, negative ion inside. No change taking place. This situation is called polarized or resting stage. With sodium, I told you towards outer side, and potassium and negatively charged protein and nucleic acid and chlorine inside. This stage is called resting stage. We call it as polarized state. Remember? Okay. Now, somehow we have a pump here and some amount of sodium and a potassium that leak across the membrane to restore the ion to their appropriate side. See here, I'm showing the membrane. This is the sodium that is present outside, this potassium present inside, and with the ATP, adenosine triphosphate, we'll have the channel that is taking place, pump that is taking place here, where to maintain the sodium positive ion outside, some sodium and potassium that keep on leaking out across this particular membrane, and this is against the concentration gradients. So remember, against the concentration gradients, when we say we require to give the energy, that energy will be supplied by ATP, and sodium is being forced out, potassium inside, and this pump is called as sodium pump, or we call sodium potassium exchange pump, remember. So to make this membrane positive negative, we have a pump that operate here, this is called sodium potassium pump, remember. Okay, now we'll conclude with the one more slide. The difference in distribution of sodium and potassium on two sides of a membrane produce that potential difference of minus 50 to minus 100 millivolt. Remember, it is minus 70 millivolt. This is called resting potential. And in a resting membrane is more permeable to potassium than the sodium, so resulting into the potassium diffuse and sodium causing difference in the polarity, remember. So there is a negative charge inside and positive charge outside. This is called a resting stage, remember. Okay. The nerve membrane not only has a leakage channel but also has many gated channel for sodium and potassium. This is called voltage gated channel. These channel enable neuron to change its membrane potential across the potential in response to a stimulus, remember. So we have, in addition to sodium potassium pump, some voltage gated channel that work for the exchange of these ions, remember. Okay, now we'll have two important properties to be discussed. One is called depolarization, one is called a repolarization. Short of a time, we'll stop here. I will give you this as homework, remember, where the situation change and the negative charge will more outside, positive charge will increase inside. This situation is against the polarized. This is called depolarization, remember. Here I am showing. And that way the impulse will travel all the way from cell body cyton to the telode dendrite. This situation is called depolarization. And exactly opposite will take place where again the situation will come to the negative inside and positive outside. This is called as repolarization. Make a short note on your own. This will be the homework: depolarization and repolarization. We'll stop here. We'll continue with the nervous system in man next time. Quick revision will take what we studied today. We started with the synapse to discuss with. We said we have two types of synapse. One is called as electrical synapse and one is called as chemical synapse. Difference I told you, electrical synapse, almost the membranes are close. And that way we have transmission of a nerve impulse which takes faster, remember. But exactly opposite, we'll have a chemical synapse that will have a little bit gap. And the gap will be filled with the neurotransmitter, no doubt. It will take a little time to pass the impulse, but this is the one which is measured in our body, remember. Two types of synapse and how the transmission of a nerve impulse takes place that we discuss in short. Two topic that I'm giving for homework: depolarization and repolarization, that you can make two short note. Nervous tissue we discussed, and now we want to discuss how this nervous system is present in our body. That we'll discuss in the next lecture. Okay, we'll stop. Keep on studying and keep on making your own notes with the help of PPT. Okay, we'll stop. Thank you.